Where the Pacific meets the mountains, there is something remarkable about California. Long before it became America's most populous state, before highways stretched across deserts, and before towering cities reached toward the Pacific sky, California was already a place of extraordinary contrasts. Snow-covered peaks stood only hours away from scorching valleys. Ancient redwoods watched silently over forests that had existed for thousands of years. Along the coast, waves from the Pacific Ocean carved cliffs that had outlasted generations of explorers, settlers, dreamers, and wanderers. Tonight, our journey begins here. Imagine standing along the shoreline just before sunset. The ocean carries a cool breeze inland, while the last rays of daylight paint the horizon in shades of amber and crimson. The sounds are gentle, the rhythm of waves, distant seabirds, and the whisper of wind moving through coastal grass. It is peaceful. It is beautiful. It is also a reminder that every place carries stories. Some inspire hope, others leave scars that generations never forget. Welcome to Cozy Night Stories. Tonight we'll travel across California, not to celebrate its fame or fortune, but to better understand a difficult chapter of its history. This is not a story meant to glorify violence or sensationalize tragedy. Instead, it is an opportunity to learn about the lives forever changed by crime, the investigators who searched tirelessly for answers, and the communities that endured unimaginable loss. Tonight's journey focuses on individuals who share one fact in common: they were born here. Before we begin tonight's journey, if you enjoy true crime stories, I'd be honored to have you subscribe so you don't miss future episodes in the series. Your support helps this channel continue exploring the stories behind the places we call home. Now, let's begin. A state of contrasts. If you've never traveled through California, it can be difficult to appreciate just how vast it truly is. Drive north from San Diego, and you'll pass beaches where the Pacific sparkles beneath nearly endless sunshine. Continue farther, and those coastal views gradually give way to sprawling neighborhoods, vineyards, farmland, mountain ranges, and forests where towering redwoods have quietly stood for centuries. Travel east, and the landscape changes again. The fertile Central Valley unfolds in broad open fields that have earned California its reputation as one of the nation's agricultural heartlands. Orchards stretch toward the horizon, vineyards climb gentle hillsides, small farming communities wake long before sunrise, their days measured by harvests rather than clocks. Beyond those valleys rise the Sierra Nevada. Farther still lies the Mojave Desert, a landscape so stark and beautiful that silence itself seems to become part of the scenery. California has always attracted dreamers. Some arrived searching for gold, others came hoping to make films. Some sought careers in aviation, technology, science, or medicine. Others simply wanted a fresh beginning. For nearly 2 centuries, California has represented possibility. Yet possibility belongs equally to everyone. History reminds us that among the millions who built honest, meaningful lives were a very small number who chose paths that brought devastation to others. And I'm not talking about people who moved there to commit crimes, or killers who passed through on their way somewhere else. I mean people who were born there. People who grew up on California soil, went to California schools, walked California streets as kids, and then went on to do terrible things. Tonight, we're going to look at 11 of these individuals. Each one was born in California. Each one took multiple lives, and each one left behind a trail of victims whose names deserve to be remembered. I want to be clear about something right from the start. This is not about glorifying anyone. These killers don't deserve fame. What they deserve is to be studied, understood in the clinical sense, and locked away. Some of the names will be familiar to you if you follow true crime. Others might be new. But all of them committed acts that destroyed families, shattered communities, and left scars that never fully healed. California has had serial killers who operated there but were born elsewhere. Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, was born in Texas. Joseph D'Angelo, the Golden State Killer, was born in New York. Rodney Alcala was born in Texas. William Bonin was born in Connecticut. Those are notorious names, but they don't belong in this particular story. This is about the homegrown ones, the ones who started life in California and turned it into a hunting ground. What makes someone born in a place of such natural beauty and opportunity go down this path? That's a question people have been asking for decades, and honestly, there's no clean answer. Some of these killers had awful childhoods full of abuse and neglect. Some had families that seemed normal from the outside. Some had severe mental illness that went untreated or was actively enabled by people who should have known better. Some were just plain evil, if you want to use that word. I don't think there's a single explanation that covers all of them. What I can tell you is that their stories, as dark as they are, also contain stories of courage. Survivors who fought back. Detectives who spent decades on cold cases. Families who never gave up looking for answers. Communities that refused to let fear win. Those stories are part of this too. As darkness settles over California tonight, our journey begins. So settle into your favorite chair, dim the lights if you'd like, and let the world slow down for a little while. Our journey through California is only beginning. Edmund Kemper, the co-ed killer. Edmund Emil Kemper III was born on December 18, 1948, in Burbank, California. If you've seen photos of him, you probably remember his size. He stood 6 feet 9 inches tall. As a child, he was already a head taller than everyone his age. He was born weighing 13 pounds. Everything about him physically was big, but it was what was happening inside his head that really mattered. Kemper was the middle child and only son of Edmund Emil Kemper Jr. and Clarnell Elizabeth Kemper. His father had served in World War II and worked testing nuclear weapons at the Pacific Proving Grounds before returning to California as an electrician. His mother, Clarnell, was from Montana. Their marriage was deeply troubled. Kemper's father later said that living with Clarnell was worse than wartime suicide missions and atomic bomb testings. That's quite a statement from a man who had been through all of that. The signs were there early. As a young child, Kemper performed rituals with his sister's dolls, culminating in cutting off their heads and hands. When his older sister teased him about kissing his teacher, he reportedly said, "If I kiss her, I'd have to kill her first." He played games called gas chamber and electric chair with his younger sister. At age 10, he buried a family cat alive, dug it up, decapitated it, and mounted its head on a spike. At 13, he killed another family cat and kept pieces of it in his closet. These are the kinds of warning signs that, in hindsight, scream that something is terribly wrong, but at the time they were missed or ignored. His parents separated in 1957 and divorced in 1961. Kemper went with his mother to Helena, Montana. Clarnell was, by multiple accounts, a neurotic, domineering alcoholic who belittled and humiliated him constantly. She made him sleep in a locked basement because she feared he would harm his sisters. She told him no woman would ever love him and refused to show him affection out of fear she would turn him gay. She called him a real weirdo during a phone call with his father, not knowing Kemper was listening. At 14, he ran away to his father in Van Nuys, only to find his father had remarried and had a stepson. He was sent to live with his paternal grandparents on a ranch near North Fork, California, in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada. On August 27, 1964, at the age of 15, Kemper killed his grandmother, Maud Matilda Kemper. He shot her once in the head and twice in the back, then stabbed her several times. When his grandfather, Edmund Emil Kemper Sr., came home, Kemper shot him in the driveway. He told police he just wanted to see what it felt like to kill Grandma. Court psychiatrists diagnosed him with paranoid schizophrenia, and he was sent to Atascadero State Hospital, a maximum security facility. While at Atascadero, Kemper was a model patient. He was intelligent, cooperative, and articulate. He memorized psychological tests to the point where he could manipulate the results. He learned what the doctors wanted to hear and told them exactly that. Staff members considered him reformed. He was released in 1969, at the age of 21, into the custody of his mother, who had moved to Aptos, near Santa Cruz. The decision to release him was based on the belief that he no longer posed a threat. It was catastrophically wrong. Kemper got a job and tried to appear normal. He even worked with the California Highway Division, which gave him access to state vehicles and parking stickers for university campuses. He was intelligent enough to know how to blend in. He was 6 feet 9 inches tall, which made him conspicuous, but he was also polite, soft-spoken, and well-read. People who knew him casually found him friendly and helpful. He picked up hitchhikers regularly, which in the early 1970s was still a common practice. He knew the routes, the schedules, and the patterns of college students. He also knew which ones were least likely to be missed right away. But the darkness hadn't gone anywhere. It was just waiting. Between May 1972 and April 1973, Kemper killed 8 more people. His victims were primarily young female college students. Marianne Pesce and Anita Mary Lucchesa were 18-year-old Fresno State University students who were hitchhiking to visit friends at Stanford. Kemper picked them up in Berkeley, drove to a secluded area, handcuffed Pesce, locked Lucchesa in the trunk, and murdered both. He was stopped by police for a broken taillight with their bodies in the trunk, but the officer didn't check. Marianne Pesce's skull was later found on Loma Prieta Mountain. Anita Lucchesa's remains were never found. 15-year-old Aiko Koo was a Korean dance student who had missed her bus and was hitchhiking to class. Kemper pulled a gun on her, then accidentally locked himself out of his car. She let him back in. He choked her unconscious, raped her, and killed her. He went to a bar for drinks afterward with her body in the trunk. Cynthia Ann Cindy Schall was an 18-year-old Cabrillo college student. Kemper shot her with a .22 caliber pistol, hid her body in a closet overnight, then dismembered her in his mother's bathtub. He buried her severed head in his mother's garden, facing upward toward her bedroom window, saying his mother always wanted people to look up to her. Rosalind Heather Thorpe, 23, and Alice Helen Allison Liu, 20, were both students at UC Santa Cruz. On February 5, 1973, after an argument with his mother, Kemper picked them up on campus. He shot Rosalind in the head and Alice in the temple. He beheaded them in his car and brought the headless bodies into his mother's house. Then came April 20, 1973. Kemper's mother came home from a party. While she sat in bed reading, she said something to him about sitting up all night and talking. He said goodnight and waited for her to fall asleep. Then he bludgeoned her with a claw hammer, slit her throat, and beheaded her. He screamed at her severed head and threw darts at it. He cut out her tongue and larynx and put them in the garbage disposal, which couldn't break down the vocal cords. He then invited his mother's best friend, 59-year-old Sarah Taylor Sally Hallett, over and strangled her. After that, Kemper fled. He drove over 1,000 miles to Pueblo, Colorado, taking caffeine pills to stay awake, with 3 guns and hundreds of rounds of ammunition. He called police to confess, but they didn't take him seriously at first. He called again hours later and asked to speak to an officer he knew personally. He confessed and waited to be arrested. At his trial, which began on October 23, 1973, Kemper's defense attorney entered a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity. The trial was a spectacle. Kemper was articulate, detailed, and matter-of-fact about what he had done. He took the stand on November 1st and testified that he killed his victims because he wanted them for myself, like possessions. He tried to convince the jury that only someone with an aberrant mind could have committed such acts, claiming 2 beings inhabited his body. One court-appointed psychiatrist, Dr. Joel Fort, alleged that Kemper had engaged in cannibalism, slicing flesh from victims' legs and consuming it in a casserole. Kemper later recanted this confession. 3 court-appointed psychiatrists found him legally sane under the Monaghan standard, which asks whether the defendant understood the nature and quality of their actions and could distinguish right from wrong. The jury of 6 men and 6 women deliberated for just 5 hours before finding him sane and guilty on all 8 counts of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to 7 years to life for each count, served concurrently, resulting in 8 concurrent life sentences. He had actually asked for the death penalty, even requesting death by torture, but a moratorium on capital punishment in California prevented that outcome. As of 2024, Kemper remains incarcerated at the California Medical Facility in Vacaville. He's been denied parole 10 times. He uses a wheelchair, suffers from diabetes and coronary heart disease, and was classified as high risk to reoffend in a 2024 psychiatric evaluation. His next parole hearing is in 2031. While in prison, Kemper actually became one of the most prolific narrators of audiobooks for the blind, spending over 5,000 hours recording books. He was also known for manipulating and intimidating Herbert Mullen, his fellow inmate and fellow Santa Cruz serial killer. The irony of a man who killed his own mother and was feared by other inmates choosing to read books for the blind is something I'll leave to you to make sense of. Herbert Mullen. Herbert William Mullen was born on April 18, 1947 in Salinas, California. That's the same city where John Steinbeck grew up, a place known for its agriculture and its literature. Mullen's birthday was significant in his own mind because April 18th was also the anniversary of the 1906 San Francisco earthquake. He thought that was deeply meaningful. He thought a lot of things were deeply meaningful. What makes Mullen's story particularly haunting is how he started. He wasn't always the way he became. In high school, at San Lorenzo Valley High School in Felton, a small town in the Santa Cruz Mountains, Mullen had friends. He was voted most likely to succeed by his classmates. He attended Cabrillo College and earned a degree in civil highway technology. By all accounts, he was on a normal path. Then his friend Dean Richardson died in a car accident shortly after their high school graduation in 1965. Mullen was devastated. He built shrines to Richardson in his room. He became obsessed with reincarnation, and something in his mind began to break apart. Over the next several years, Mullen was in and out of mental hospitals. He was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, a condition likely accelerated by his use of LSD. He was discharged repeatedly because doctors deemed him to pose no risk of harm to himself or others. That assessment would prove catastrophically wrong. By 1972, Mullen had moved back in with his parents in Felton. He was hearing voices. He believed that the Vietnam War had produced enough American deaths to serve as a blood sacrifice to nature, preventing earthquakes. With the war winding down, he believed he needed to start killing people himself to keep California from being destroyed by a catastrophic earthquake. He later said his father had telepathically ordered him to take lives. Between October 1972 and February 1973, Herbert Mullen murdered 13 people. His first victim was Lawrence Whitey White, a 55-year-old man who offered to help fix Mullen's car in exchange for a ride. Mullen claimed White sent him telepathic messages. He beat White's head with a baseball bat and dragged the body into the woods. His second victim was Mary Margaret Guilfoyle, a 24-year-old Cabrillo College student who accepted a ride from Mullen. He stabbed her in the chest while driving. He later disemboweled her corpse to examine her organs for evidence about pollution. Her body wasn't found for months. On November 2, 1972, Mullen went to St. Mary's Catholic Church in Los Gatos to confess. He killed Father Henri Tomé, a 64-year-old priest in the confessional booth, beating, kicking, and stabbing him. In January 1973, Mullen went looking for a man named Jim Gianera. Kathleen Kathy Francis directed him to Gianera's cabin. Mullen shot Jim Gianera 3 times. He shot Joan Gianera. Then he went back to Kathy Francis's home and shot her and her 2 children. 4-year-old Demon Francis and 9-year-old David Hughes were killed. They were children, the youngest victims in this entire script. On February 10, 1973, Mullen encountered 4 teenage boys camping illegally in a state park in Santa Cruz. He claimed to be a park ranger and told them to leave because they were polluting the forest. When they didn't leave, he returned the next day and shot all 4 in the head. David Oliker was 18, Robert Spector was 18, Brian Scott Card was 19, Mark Dreibelbus was 15. His final victim was Fred Abbey Perez, a 72-year-old man working in his garden. Mullen did a U-turn, came back, placed a rifle across the hood of his car, and shot Perez once in the heart. A neighbor witnessed the killing and wrote down Mullen's license plate. That neighbor's actions ended Mullen's killing spree. A patrolman pulled him over. The .22 caliber pistol was sitting right next to him. He didn't resist. Here's something that makes the Mullen case especially disturbing. At the exact same time Mullen was killing people in the Santa Cruz area, Edmund Kemper was doing the same thing. Two serial killers, operating in the same county, at the same time, killing a combined 21 people. The police investigations were confused by the overlap because the victims differed in age, race, and sex, and there was no single pattern connecting them. Both were arrested within weeks of each other. At his trial, which began July 30, 1973, the central question was whether Mullen was legally sane. Did he understand the nature and quality of his actions? Could he distinguish right from wrong? The prosecution, led by Chris Cottle, argued that Mullen covered his tracks and showed premeditation in some crimes, pointing out that he had disposed of weapons, changed locations, and in some cases, taken steps to avoid detection. The defense, led by public defender Jim Jackson, the same attorney who would represent Edmund Kemper, argued that Mullen's delusions made him kill. The jury heard about his belief that murders prevented earthquakes, his claim that his father telepathically ordered him to kill, and his conviction that he was acting as a sacrificial agent for nature. After 14 hours of deliberation, the jury reached a split verdict. They convicted Mullen of 2 counts of first-degree murder for Jim Gianera and Kathy Francis, finding that those crimes were premeditated. For the other 9 murders, they convicted him of second-degree murder, considering them crimes of impulse driven by his mental illness. He was sentenced to life imprisonment. Santa Clara County later charged him with the murder of Father Henri Tomei, and on December 11, 1973, he pleaded guilty to second-degree murder in that case. Mullen was denied parole 8 times. He died of natural causes on August 18, 2022, at the age of 75, at the California Healthcare Facility in Stockton. Until his death, he said he committed his crimes only to save the environment. In prison, Mullen and Kemper were housed near each other. Kemper, who was much larger, would throw water on Mullen to make him stop singing and give him peanuts when he behaved. Kemper called it behavior modification treatment. Richard Chase, the Vampire of Sacramento. Richard Trenton Chase was born on May 23, 1950, in California. Sources differ on whether his exact birthplace was Sacramento or Santa Clara County, but either way, he was a California native. He would become known as the Vampire of Sacramento, and if you know anything about his crimes, you know that nickname was unfortunately accurate. Chase was the first of 2 children born to Richard Edgar Chase and Beatrice Lorene Chase. The family was middle class and Presbyterian. But behind that ordinary exterior, things were deeply wrong. Both Richard and his sister were frequently beaten by their father. The parents argued constantly. The mother sought psychiatric treatment on at least 2 occasions in the early 1960s because she suspected her husband was unfaithful and trying to poison her. The parents separated in 1964, reconciled, and eventually divorced in 1972. By age 10, Chase exhibited what criminologists call the McDonald triad: cruelty to animals, fire setting, and bedwetting. These 3 behaviors together are considered potential warning signs of violent tendencies later in life. He developed a rich fantasy life centered on power. As a teenager at Mira Loma High School, Chase was described as a loner, though he had a small group of friends who were known as acid heads. He used marijuana and LSD heavily and drank excessively. He had a criminal record for possession and theft. His IQ was 95, his grades were mostly C's, D's, and F's. He discovered he was impotent, and a psychiatrist told him his inability to maintain an erection may have stemmed from extreme suppressed anger, possibly directed at women in general. His mental deterioration in adulthood was severe and well documented. He became obsessed with his physical health, cutting out photos of human organs from a medical textbook and pasting them on his bedroom walls. He believed his cranial bones were separating and moving around his skull. He shaved his head to monitor the bone movement. He held oranges against his head, believing vitamin C would be absorbed by his brain. In 1976, after injecting rabbit's blood into his veins, he was involuntarily committed to Beverly Manor Psychiatric Hospital. He was diagnosed with severe schizophrenia. Antipsychotic medication didn't work. He was found in bushes with blood around his mouth and decapitated bird remains. He was released to his mother's custody, and she took him off his medication without consulting doctors. What happened next was the result of a mentally ill person being released from care, taken off medication, and left to his own devices. It's worth noting that Chase's deterioration was not sudden or unpredictable. It was documented. It was observed. There were warnings. On August 3, 1977, Chase was arrested by Bureau of Indian Affairs officers on a Native American reservation at Pyramid Lake, Nevada. His vehicle contained blood-smeared seats, a .22 caliber rifle, a .30-30 Marlin rifle, a plastic bucket containing a raw liver, and blood-stained clothing. Chase himself was found squatting naked on a rock ledge, his body smeared with blood. Lab results showed the liver was from a cow and the blood was bovine. No charges were filed. This was a man who was visibly, demonstrably spiraling, and nobody intervened effectively. Chase progressed from killing birds and rabbits to killing dogs. He stole dogs, hanged them in his apartment, drank their blood, and ate their internal organs. His apartment was becoming a chamber of horrors before he ever turned to human victims. Between December 29, 1977, and January 27, 1978, Richard Chase murdered 6 people. His first victim was Ambrose Edward Griffin, a 51-year-old engineer and father of 2. Griffin was returning from a shopping trip with his wife, walking groceries from the kitchen to his car. Chase shot him in a drive-by. Police viewed it as a random, motiveless crime. On January 23, 1978, Chase entered the home of Teresa Lynn Wallen, a 22-year-old woman who was 3 months pregnant. She was taking out the trash. He shot her multiple times, then mutilated her body extensively, using a butcher's knife and an empty yogurt cup to collect and drink her blood. Her husband, David, found her body that evening. On January 27, 1978, Chase entered the home of Evelyn Elizabeth Murath, a 36-year-old divorced mother of 3. He shot her friend, 52-year-old Daniel James Meredith, twice in the head. He shot 6-year-old Jason Bradford Murath. He shot Evelyn, and he shot 22-month-old David Michael Ferreira in his crib. The details of what he did to Evelyn Murath's body are among the most disturbing in the history of American crime. He engaged in necrophilia and cannibalism. He drained her blood into a bucket and drank it. He fled with the toddler's body, which was later found in a cardboard box in an alleyway near a church. The investigation that followed was massive. Over 60 police officers conducted door-to-door inquiries. A key witness, Nancy Holden, recognized Chase in a shopping center. She described him as disheveled, emaciated, blood-stained, with sunken eyes and a thick yellow crust around his mouth. He had asked her for a ride. She locked her doors and drove off, then called police. Police found Chase's apartment. The walls, floors, and ceiling were extensively blood-stained. The refrigerator contained human body parts. A blood-stained hatchet, an amber cup caked with blood, and kitchen knives stolen from the Wallen residence were recovered. A calendar had the word "Today" written on the dates of the murders and on 44 additional dates throughout 1978. Chase confessed, saying he had to kill because he had blood poisoning and needed blood. At his trial, which began January 2, 1979 in Palo Alto, nearly 100 witnesses testified and over 250 exhibits were presented. The prosecution, led by Ronald Tochterman, argued the murders were purposeful and calculated acts carried out with malice aforethought. They pointed to the fact that Chase had purchased ammunition, set fires in neighboring apartments to distract occupants he believed were spying on him, and entered unlocked homes deliberately. The defense, led by Farah Salami, argued that the murders were not premeditated, but were the product of Chase's delusional thought process resulting from severe mental illness and aimed for a conviction of second-degree murder. Nearly 100 witnesses testified. Over 250 exhibits were presented. Key evidence included Chase's firearm, which ballistics proved was used to kill all 6 victims, and Meredith's wallet and credit cards found in Chase's possession. Chase himself testified on March 29, 1979. He admitted the murders but claimed inability to recall all details. He said he was semi-conscious during the Wallene murder, but recalled drinking her blood. He admitted taking David Ferreira's body in a green bucket and later decapitating the toddler to obtain blood. He refused to eat prison food because he believed he might catch a worse case of cancer than he already had. A psychiatrist testified that Chase suffered from a persecution complex and believed consuming victims' blood would sustain his lifespan. The jury deliberated for 6 hours over 2 days and found him guilty on 6 counts of first-degree murder. After a sanity phase lasting just 65 minutes of deliberation, he was found sane under California law. He was sentenced to death. When the verdict was read, Chase shouted, "They brainwashed me. There's a conspiracy and I'm still being poisoned here." On December 26, 1980, Richard Chase was found dead in his cell at San Quentin. He had hoarded Sinequan tablets for weeks and overdosed. He was 30 years old. He was found lying face down on his bunk, his arms extended into his pillow. Beside him were pages of handwriting and illustrations, including a message about pills that could cause his heart to stop. Sacramento detective Ray Biondi later wrote that Chase had been poisoned to death all right, by his own hand. Randy Kraft, the scorecard killer. Randy Stephen Kraft was born on March 19, 1945 in Long Beach, California. He was the 4th child and only son of Opal Lee and Harold Herbert Kraft. His father worked at Douglas Aircraft Company. His mother was a seamstress and later a school cook. When Randy was 3, the family moved to Midway City in Orange County, where his father converted a small Women's Army Corps dormitory into a 3-bedroom house. What makes Kraft's early life different from some of the others on this list is that it seemed, by most accounts, normal. He was a bright student. He earned A grades. He was a varsity tennis player. He founded the Westminster World Affairs Club. He graduated 10th in a class of 390 students. He was a staunch Republican who aspired to become a U.S. Senator. He attended Claremont Men's College and earned a degree in economics. He knew from high school that he was homosexual, but he kept it private initially. In college, he began having relationships with men. He bartended at a cocktail lounge in Garden Grove that catered to a gay clientele. He was arrested in 1966 for lewd conduct after propositioning an undercover police officer, but no charges were filed. His politics shifted from conservative to liberal, and he campaigned for Robert F. Kennedy, even receiving a personal thank you letter from the senator. He enlisted in the Air Force after college and served at Edwards Air Force Base. He came out to his family and superiors while serving. His father flew into a rage. He received a general discharge. After that, he moved back home and worked as a bartender. Between 1971 and 1983, Randy Kraft murdered at least 16 young men. Investigators believe the real number could be as high as 67. His victims were males between the ages of 14 and 30. Many were U.S. Marines. He drugged them with alcohol and tranquilizers, tortured them, and killed them. He discarded their bodies alongside freeways in Southern California and on business trips in Oregon and Michigan. The list of his known victims is long, and each name represents a life cut short. Wayne Joseph Duquette, a bartender at a gay bar in Sunset Beach, believed to be Kraft's first victim. Edward Daniel Moore, 20, found beside the 405 freeway in Seal Beach. Kevin Clark Bailey, 17. Ronnie Jean Wiebe, 20. Vincent Cruz Mestas, 23, whose hands were severed and never found. Mark Howard Hall, 22, who was bound to a tree and subjected to hours of torture before death. Scott Michael Hughes, 18. Roland Gerald Young, 23. Richard Allen Keith, 20. Keith Arthur Klingbeil, 23. Richard Anthony Crosby, 20. Michael Joseph Inderbeaton, 21, who was castrated. Donnie Harold Creasel, 20. Keith Anthony Jackson, 21, whose dismembered remains were found in trash bags. Gregory Wallace Jolly, 19. Jeffrey Sayer, 15. Mark Allen Marsh, 19, who was decapitated. Michael Sean O'Fallon, 17. Larry Eugene Parks, 30, a Vietnam veteran identified in 2025 through DNA. Robert Wyatt Loggins, 19. Michael Cluck, 17. Christopher Allen Williams, 17. Raymond Davis, 14, last seen looking for his missing dog. Robert Avila Jr., 16. Arna Michael Lane, 24. Brian Witcher, 26. Anthony Jose Silvera, 29. Dennis Alt, 24. Christopher Schoenborn, 20. Lance Taggs, 19. Eric Herbert Church, 21. Jeffrey Allen Nelson, 18. Roger James Duvall Jr., 20. And Terry Lee Gambrell, 25, a Marine whose body was found in the passenger seat of Kraft's car when he was pulled over for drunk driving. When Kraft was arrested on May 14, 1983, for driving under the influence on Interstate 5 in Mission Viejo, officers found Gambrell's body slumped in the passenger seat. In the trunk of his car, investigators found a coded list of 61 entries believed to represent each of his victims. The entries were chilling in their casualness. EDM for Edward Daniel Moore. Marine Head BP for Mark Marsh, a Marine who was decapitated. Stable for Wayne Duquette, a bartender at the stable bar. Dog for Raymond Davis, last seen searching for his dog. Deodorant for Robert Avila Jr., described as a heavy deodorant user. His trial lasted 13 months, from September 1988 to November 1989. It was the most expensive trial in Orange County history. Nearly 160 witnesses testified and over 1,000 exhibits were presented. The defense argued the evidence was circumstantial and that Kraft was the victim of mistaken identity. The prosecution presented bloodstains, hair and fiber evidence, fingerprints on glass shards from one crime scene, photographs of victims found in his vehicle, gasoline receipts placing him at locations where victims were abducted, and personal possessions of victims in his possession. During the penalty phase, the prosecution presented evidence of Oregon and Michigan homicides they were certain Kraft had also committed but had not been tried for in Orange County. The defense tried a novel approach, presenting a PET scan that allegedly showed frontal lobe abnormalities that they argued reduced Kraft's ability to control his emotions and impulses. The prosecution's rebuttal was direct. There is nothing wrong with Mr. Kraft's mind other than that he likes killing for sexual satisfaction. On May 12, 1989, after 11 days of jury deliberation, Kraft was found guilty of 16 counts of murder, 1 count of sodomy, and 1 count of emasculation. He was sentenced to death on November 29, 1989. The judge, Donald McCartan, said, "If anyone ever deserved the death penalty, he's got it coming." Kraft's conviction and sentence were upheld by the California Supreme Court on August 9, 2000. As of 2025, Kraft remains on death row, now held at the California Institution for Men in San Bernardino County after being transferred from San Quentin. He continues to deny responsibility for any of the homicides. If you're still with me tonight, thank you. A quick like lets YouTube know to share it with other true crime fans, and I'd love to hear in the comments where you're listening from, or which state you'd like us to visit in a future episode. Reading your comments is one of my favorite parts of creating these stories. Patrick Kearney, the trash bag killer. Patrick Wayne Kearney was born on September 24, 1939, in East Los Angeles, California. He was the oldest of 3 sons. His father was an officer with the Los Angeles Police Department. His mother was a homemaker. The family moved to Reseda when Patrick was about 11, and then to Wilcox, Arizona, before returning to California and settling in Redondo Beach. Kearney was a thin, sickly child who was frequently bullied. Kids called him queer, despite his supposed interest in girls. He became withdrawn. He developed sexual fantasies revolving around domination. He began engaging in bestiality at age 13. His father bought him a .22 caliber rifle and taught him to kill pigs and chickens, hoping it would toughen him up. It didn't. He served in the Air Force from 1958 to 1961 and was stationed in Texas. He later claimed to have befriended Lee Harvey Oswald at a military language school, though this has never been verified. After his discharge, he settled in Long Beach and worked as an engineer for Hughes Aircraft. Between 1962 and 1977, Patrick Kearney sexually assaulted and murdered a minimum of 28 young men and boys in Southern California. He would later confess to 35. His method was consistent. He carried a Derringer .22 pistol. He picked up victims along the freeway or at gay bars. He shot them in the temple above the ear, while steering with one hand and holding the pistol with the other. He left the bodies slumped in the passenger seat, drove to a secluded area, sexually violated the corpses, and then dismembered them with a hacksaw. He wrapped the severed limbs in industrial trash bags and scattered them along highways, in canyons, in landfills, and in the desert. That's how he got his name. His victims included James Fletcher Barwick, 17, Ronald Dean Smith Jr., who was 5 years old, picked up while walking home and taken to McDonald's because he said he was hungry, Albert Rivera, 21, Larry Gene Walters, 20, Kenneth Eugene Buchanan, 17, Oliver Peter Molitor, 13, Larry Armendariz, 15, Michael Craig McGee, 13, John Woods, 23, Larry Espy, 17, Wilfred Lawrence Faherty, 20, Randall Lawrence Moore, 16, Timothy Brian Ingham, 19, Robert William Benefiel, 17, David Allen, 27, Mark Andrew Orech, 20, Nicholas Hernandez Jimenez, 28, Arturo Ramos Marquez, 24, John Otis LeMay, 17, and Merle Hondo Chance, who was 8 years old. 8, 5, 13. These were children. Kearney was caught because of forensic evidence. When police investigated the murder of John Otis LeMay, they visited Kearney's home. They clipped carpet fibers that later matched green threads found on the trash bags used to wrap body parts. They found a hacksaw covered in dried blood. The blood on the hacksaw matched LeMay's blood type. Pubic hair found on LeMay's body matched Kearney's. Kearney and his roommate David Hill fled to El Paso, Texas, but their families convinced them to return. On July 1, 1977, Kearney walked into the Riverside County Sheriff's Office, pointed at a wanted poster, and said he was the suspect. He made a full confession, admitting to 28 murders and later adding 7 more. He pleaded guilty to 21 counts of murder to avoid the death penalty and was sentenced to 21 consecutive life sentences. Police were certain he was responsible for the other 7 murders he had admitted to, but lacked the physical evidence to charge him. After sentencing, Kearney made a disturbing claim. He alleged that there were other people involved with his murders and that they could be found within police custody. He said, "They should have obtained quite a few while investigating other cases similar to mine. You might find photos of some of the alleged victims of my case. You should especially look for movies showing live torture or evisceration." This claim was never substantiated, but it added another layer of unease to an already chilling case. As of 2025, Kearney remains at Mule Creek State Prison, serving 21 consecutive life sentences with no possibility of parole. He is one of 3 known serial killers who preyed on young men in Southern California during this era, alongside William Bonin and Randy Kraft. What makes this particularly disturbing is that all 3 were operating at roughly the same time, in the same region, targeting the same demographic. Kearney was the first of the 3 to be identified, but his arrest did not stop the killings. Bonin and Kraft continued for years afterward. David Carpenter, the Trailside Killer. David Joseph Carpenter was born on May 6, 1930, in San Francisco, California. His parents were Elwood and Frances Carpenter. His father was an alcoholic who beat him. His mother was domineering and barred him from playing outside with other children. She forced him to learn the violin and take ballet lessons. He was bullied at school for having a stutter. Teachers recommended speech therapy, but his mother refused. He was thrown out of high school in his sophomore year for dragging a female student down the hall after an argument. He acknowledged that he had molested several children in his adolescence, including 2 of his cousins, starting at age 15. He was first arrested at 17 for sexually assaulting a 3-year-old girl. He spent time at Napa State Hospital. In 1960, he attacked a 32-year-old woman named Lois DeAndrade in San Francisco, slashing her hands with a knife and beating her with a hammer. The attack was interrupted by a military officer who shot and wounded Carpenter. He later claimed his trigger was the Alfred Hitchcock film Psycho, released that same year. He was sentenced to 14 years in federal prison and released in 1969. He committed more assaults in 1970, was imprisoned again, and escaped from jail. He was eventually granted full release in February 1977 and then turned over to federal custody. He was fully released on May 2, 1979. Between 1979 and 1981, David Carpenter murdered at least 7 people, all in the San Francisco Bay Area. He was convicted of 7 murders, and authorities linked or suspected him in additional killings. He targeted hikers and joggers on trails near Mount Tamalpais and Point Reyes National Seashore. His victims included Etta Kane, 44, stripped and shot on a hiking trail near Mount Tamalpais; Mary Frances Bennett, 23, attacked while jogging at Land's End and stabbed over 25 times; Barbara Ann Schwartz, 23, stabbed to death near Mount Tamalpais; Richard Stowers, 19, and Cynthia Moreland, 18, both forced to kneel and shot execution style on the Sky Camp Trail at Point Reyes; Anne Evelyn Alderson, 26, raped and shot at Mount Tamalpais State Park; Diane Marie O'Connell, 22, and Shauna May, 23, both shot near Point Reyes; Heather Roxanne Skaggs, 20, lured with a ruse about a used car and fatally shot at Big Basin State Park. On March 29, 1981, Carpenter attacked Ellen Marie Hansen, 20, and Stephen Russell Hertel, 20, on a trail at Henry Cowell Redwoods State Park. He ordered Hansen to follow him and told her, "I want to rape you." When she refused, he shot her multiple times. Hertel was shot in the neck but survived with severe nerve damage to his vocal cords and eye. He would later identify Carpenter without hesitation in a police lineup. Ellen Hansen's bravery and Stephen Hertel's survival were critical to catching Carpenter. Hertel's description of a thin, balding man in his early 50s wearing a baseball cap and a yellow and orange windbreaker with Bud on the front patch helped narrow the investigation. A tip from a 69-year-old resident who recognized the sketch led police to Carpenter. 7 FBI agents surveilled him starting on May 12, 1981. He was arrested on May 14, 1981, outside his San Francisco home. Carpenter was tried twice, in 2 different counties, for 2 different sets of murders. The first trial in Los Angeles County began on May 24, 1984, before Superior Court Judge Dion Morrow. The prosecution was led by Santa Cruz District Attorney Arthur Danner. Stephen Hertel, the survivor of the Henry Cowell Redwoods attack, took the stand and identified Carpenter without hesitation. He described being ordered down the trail, hearing the words, "I want to rape you," and then being shot. Ballistics evidence confirmed that bullets recovered from both Hansen and Skaggs came from Carpenter's .38 caliber revolver, and that the same gun was used in Marin County. The defense, in a remarkable move, admitted during closing arguments that Carpenter had killed both victims, but argued that the question was one of competency. The jury didn't buy it. Carpenter was convicted and sentenced to death on November 16, 1984. The second trial, for the 5 Marin County murders, was moved to San Diego County due to pretrial publicity. It began on January 5, 1988. The prosecution was led by Marin County Deputy District Attorney John Posey. Shane Williams, Carpenter's former prison acquaintance, testified that Carpenter had given him the .38 caliber revolver days before his arrest. Carpenter himself took the stand in April, stuttering as he testified, claiming he was elsewhere when the murders occurred. On May 10, 1988, He was convicted on 5 counts of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to death again on July 19, 1988. DNA evidence linked him to Mary Frances Bennett's 1979 murder in 2010, confirming what investigators had long suspected. As of 2025, David Carpenter is incarcerated at the California Healthcare Facility in Stockton. At 96 years old, he is the oldest death row inmate in the United States. Following Governor Gavin Newsom's 2019 moratorium on executions, his status effectively amounts to life without parole. Leonard Lake. Leonard Thomas Lake was born on October 29, 1945 in San Francisco, California. He was the first of 3 children born to Elgin Leonard Lake and Gloria Mae Williams. His parents divorced when he was 6, and the children went to live with their maternal grandmother. Lake was reportedly bright, but developed an obsession with pornography at a young age. He read the John Fowles novel The Collector as a teenager, a book about a man who kidnaps a woman and holds her captive. It became his blueprint. He allegedly killed mice by dissolving them in chemicals, the same method he would later use to dispose of human remains. He enlisted in the Marine Corps in 1964, served 2 tours in Vietnam as a radar electronics technician, and was diagnosed with schizoid personality disorder during his service. After a delusional breakdown in Da Nang, he received a medical discharge in 1971. Lake eventually settled in Northern California and met Charles Ng, a fellow former Marine who had been born in Hong Kong. Sources say they met through an advertisement Lake had placed in a survivalist magazine. Ng had escaped from military prison following a weapons theft conviction. Their partnership would become one of the most horrifying in American criminal history. Lake moved into a remote cabin near Wilseyville, California, owned by his in-laws. Next to the cabin, he built a cinderblock structure he described in his journals as a dungeon. It was a soundproofed bunker designed for one purpose: holding women captive. Lake had been planning this for years. He had drawn up blueprints. He had accumulated supplies. He had written extensively in his journals about his fantasy of keeping women as sex slaves, a fantasy directly inspired by The Collector, the novel he had read as a teenager. He even gave his project a name. He called the women he planned to capture Miranda, after the captive woman in the novel. Between 1983 and 1985, Lake and Ng kidnapped, tortured, raped, and murdered at least 11 people. Investigators believe the true number may be as high as 25, based on over 40 pounds of burned and crushed human bone fragments found at the property, and an envelope containing names suggesting up to 25 victims. The discrepancy between confirmed and suspected victims is a haunting one. Some of the bone fragments were too degraded to identify, even with modern DNA technology. They may never be named. Their victims included Lake's own younger brother, Donald Stephen Lake, who was mentally disabled. Lake stole his identity and cashed his disability checks. Charles Donald Gunner, Lake's best man at his wedding, who was invited on a road trip to Las Vegas and never returned. Harvey R. Dubbs, his wife Deborah Ann Dubbs, and their 1-year-old son Sean Christopher Dubbs. Donald Albert Giulietti, a San Francisco disc jockey. Randy Vern Jacobson, Paul Stephen Cosner, Cheryl Lynn Okoro, Clifford Raymond Parenteau, Jeffrey Dean Gerald, Michael Sean Carroll, and his 18-year-old girlfriend, Kathleen Elizabeth Allen, Lonnie Wayne Bond Sr., his girlfriend Brenda Sue O'Connor, and their 1-year-old son, Lonnie Wayne Bond Jr., and Robin Scott Stapley. The men and infants were killed immediately. The women were held captive, tortured, and raped over extended periods. Lake and Ng videotaped much of the torture. The end came on June 2, 1985. Ng was caught shoplifting a vise from a hardware store in South San Francisco and fled on foot. Lake tried to pay for the item, but police had already arrived. They noticed Lake didn't match the photo on his driver's license, which carried the name of Robin Scott Stapley, a missing San Diego man. A search of his car found a gun with a silencer and he was arrested. At the station, Lake was placed in an interrogation room with a pen, paper, and water. A short time later, a detective found him convulsing on the floor. He had swallowed cyanide pills sewn into his clothing. The notepad contained a brief suicide note revealing his and Ng's real names and confessing to their crimes. Lake died on June 6, 1985. He was 39. Investigators then went to the Wilseyville property. They found the dungeon. They unearthed over 40 pounds of burned and crushed human bone fragments from at least 11 bodies. They found a hand-drawn treasure map leading to buried buckets containing Lake's journals and videotapes documenting the torture of victims. Ng fled to Canada, where he was captured in Calgary after shooting a store security guard who had caught him shoplifting. He fought extradition for years and was finally returned to California in 1991. His trial, which began in October 1998, was one of the longest and costliest in California history, costing approximately $14 million. On February 24, 1999, he was convicted of 11 counts of murder and sentenced to death. He remains on death row at the California Medical Facility in Vacaville. The Calaveras County Sheriff's Office has continued re-examining unidentified remains from the property using modern DNA technology. In January 2025, one set of remains was identified through genetic genealogy as Reginald Reggie Frisbee, 29. Brenda Sue O'Connor's remains were also identified in 2025. Lonnie David Franklin Jr., the Grim Sleeper. Lonnie David Franklin Jr. was born on August 30, 1952, in Los Angeles, California. He grew up in south-central Los Angeles. He married and had 2 children. He served in the United States Army but was dishonorably discharged in July 1975 after being convicted of kidnapping and gang rape in Stuttgart, West Germany, in April 1974. In 1989, he was convicted of theft, assault, and battery. Between 1984 and 2007, Franklin murdered at least 10 women and 1 teenage girl in Los Angeles. He earned the nickname Grim Sleeper because he appeared to have taken a 14-year break from killing, from 1988 to 2002. All but one of his victims were black women. Many were sex workers or chronic drug users. He shot all of them with a .25 caliber gun. He took photographs of his victims, keeping hundreds of photos and videos in his garage. His known victims included Sharon Alicia Dismuke, 21, Deborah Ronette Jackson, 29, shot 3 times in the chest, found in an alley; Henrietta Wright, 35, found under a discarded mattress; Thomas Sylvester Steele, 36, Barbara Bethune-Ware, 23, Bernita Rochelle Sparks, 26, found in a trash bin; Mary Catherine Lowe, 26, Lacrica Denise Jefferson, 22, Inez Elizabeth Warren, 28, Alicia Monique Alexander, 18, Princess Cheyenne Berthomeu, 15, who was strangled and beaten, Valerie Louise McCorvey, 35, and Janicia Lavette Peters, 25, found covered with a garbage bag. There were survivors. Inietra Margette Washington, 30, was attacked on November 20, 1988. Franklin offered her a ride, drove her down an alley, shot her, and left her for dead. She survived and later testified at his trial. Fredia Gibbs, 30, a martial artist and basketball player, was attacked in 1993. Franklin drugged her drink at a party and attempted to rape her in his van. She fought him off. The original investigation in the 1980s was deeply flawed. The LAPD became aware of a serial killer targeting black women who were drug users and sex workers. The killer was initially called the South Side Slayer. By January 1986, 15 murders had been linked. But the investigation was confused by the fact that multiple serial killers were operating in the same area at the same time. Over the following years, it was discovered that at least 5 different serial killers, Louis Crane, Michael Hughes, Daniel Lee Siebert, Chester Turner, and Ivan Hill, each committed at least one of the murders originally attributed to the South Side Slayer. This is a staggering fact. The streets of south-central Los Angeles in the 1980s were so dangerous for women that multiple serial killers were active simultaneously. and their crimes overlapped enough to confuse investigators. Activist Margaret Prescott and the Black Coalition Fighting Back Serial Murders held weekly protests outside LAPD headquarters, criticizing the department for what they saw as indifference to the deaths of poor, Black women compared to the massive attention given to Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, who was active around the same time and targeting more affluent victims. The case went cold for years. Then, in 2007, the murder of Janisha Peters was linked through DNA to at least 11 unsolved murders. The LAPD formed a task force. LA Weekly reporter Christine Pelisek broke the story and coined the name Grim Sleeper. The breakthrough came through familial DNA analysis, a controversial technique. Police found no exact match between crime scene DNA and profiles in California's database, so they searched for profiles showing enough similarity to suggest a familial relationship. They found a match to Franklin's son Christopher, who had been convicted of a felony weapons charge in 2008. Christopher was too young to have committed the murders, but the match led investigators to his father. An undercover officer posed as a waiter at a restaurant where Franklin ate, collecting his discarded dishes, silverware, glasses, and pizza crusts to obtain his DNA. It was a painstaking operation. They had to be sure. They had to be certain before they made a move, because they had already missed him once. His DNA was supposed to have been entered into the database after a 2003 felony conviction, but probation officers didn't collect samples from people on unsupervised probation between November 2004 and August 2005. If that bureaucratic gap hadn't existed, Franklin might have been caught years earlier. How many lives would that have saved? How many women would still be alive? On July 7, 2010, Franklin was arrested. His trial opened on February 16, 2016, in Los Angeles Superior Court. The prosecution presented DNA evidence linking Franklin to the murders, ballistic evidence matching the .25 caliber weapon, and photographs found in his home showing victims in life and in death. At the sentencing hearing, prosecutors presented evidence relating to 4 additional victims they believed Franklin had killed but had not charged to avoid further delaying the trial. On May 5, 2016, after nearly 3 months of trial and a day and a half of jury deliberation, Franklin was convicted of all counts. On June 6, 2016, a Los Angeles County jury recommended the death penalty. On August 10, 2016, he was formally sentenced to death for each of the 10 victims named in the verdict. Franklin was found dead in his cell at San Quentin on March 28, 2020. He was 67. His cause of death was never publicly released. Investigators found over 1,000 photos and hundreds of hours of video in Franklin's home, mainly of Black women. In December 2010, the LAPD released 180 photos to the public in an attempt to identify potential additional victims. Some of those women have never been identified. Cary Stayner, the Yosemite Killer. Cary Anthony Stayner was born on August 13, 1961, in Merced, California, a small farming town in the Central Valley, about 60 miles from Yosemite National Park. He was the oldest of 5 children born to Delbert Foy and Kay Stayner. He had 3 sisters and a younger brother, Stephen Gregory Stayner. The Stayner family suffered a tragedy that made national news. On December 4, 1972, 7-year-old Stephen was abducted by child molester Kenneth Parnell. Stephen was held captive for 7 years until he escaped at age 14 with another of Parnell's victims, a 5-year-old boy named Timothy White. The story became a television miniseries in 1989 called I Know My First Name is Stephen. Stephen Stayner died in a motorcycle accident later that same year. The Stayner family story is one of the most heartbreaking in this entire script. When 7-year-old Stephen was abducted in 1972, the family was devastated. Cary was 11. He later said he felt neglected while his parents grieved over Stephen's disappearance, that the family's attention was entirely consumed by the missing child. When Stephen escaped 7 years later, and returned home, he received massive media attention, culminating in a television miniseries. Carrie, by then a young adult, once again felt overshadowed. Stephen died in a motorcycle accident in 1989 at the age of 24. Carrie told authorities after his own arrest that he had begun fantasizing about abducting and murdering women when he was 7 years old, before Stephen was even taken. While a friend of his sister was staying over at his house, he exposed himself to her. Whether the trauma of Stephen's abduction contributed to Carrie's pathology or whether something was already broken in him before that is a question that mental health professionals have debated. What is clear is that the warning signs were there and they were missed. He had been diagnosed with trichotillomania, a compulsive hair-pulling disorder, at age 3, and the resulting bald spots led to severe bullying throughout his childhood. He had to wear a baseball cap constantly. Despite all of this, Stainer was placed in accelerated classes and was named most creative student in his graduating class at Merced High School. He worked as a window installer. In 1991, he attempted suicide. In 1995, he was admitted to a psychiatric hospital. In 1997, he was arrested for drug possession. In 1997, Stainer was hired as a handyman at Cedar Lodge Motel in El Portal, California, just outside the Highway 140 entrance to Yosemite National Park. He found all of his confirmed victims there. In February 1999, Carol Even Sund, 42, her 15-year-old daughter Juliana Julie Sund, and their traveling companion, 16-year-old Argentine exchange student Silvina Peloso, checked into the Cedar Lodge. Stainer strangled Carol and shot Silvina. He raped Julie and cut her throat. He burned the rental car with the bodies of Carol and Silvina in the trunk. Their remains were found on March 18, 1999. A week later, an anonymous note with a hand-drawn map led police to Julie's remains. The note read, "We had fun with this one." Police interviewed Cedar Lodge employees, including Stainer, but he was not considered a suspect. He had no criminal history and was calm during questioning. Then, on July 21, 1999, Stainer targeted Joey Ruth Armstrong, a 26-year-old Yosemite Institute naturalist. He decapitated her. Her body was found the next day. Eyewitnesses reported seeing a blue 1972 International Scout parked outside her cabin. Detectives traced the vehicle to Stainer. FBI agents found Stainer at the Laguna del Sol nudist resort in Wilton, where he was arrested on July 24, 1999. During interrogation, he confessed not only to Armstrong's murder, but to the killings of the Sunds and Peloso. In federal court, Stainer pleaded guilty to Armstrong's murder to avoid the death penalty. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole. During the sentencing hearing, he broke down and said, "I wish I could take it back, but I can't. I wish I could tell you why I did such a thing, but I don't even know myself. I'm so sorry." In state court, for the other 3 murders, he pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. His lawyers presented evidence of family history of sexual abuse and mental illness. A psychiatrist testified that Stainer had obsessive-compulsive disorder, mild autism, and paraphilia. He was nevertheless found sane and convicted on August 27, 2002, of 3 counts of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to death. As of 2026, Stainer is incarcerated at Pelican Bay State Prison in Crescent City, California. In April 2026, the California Supreme Court denied his appeal. Dorothea Puente, the Death House landlady. Dorothea Helen Gray was born on January 9, 1929, in Redlands, California. Her parents, Trudy May and Jesse James Gray, were both alcoholics. Her father repeatedly threatened suicide in front of his children. He died of tuberculosis when Dorothea was 8. Her mother, who worked as a sex worker, lost custody of her children and died in a motorcycle accident when Dorothea was 9. Dorothea and her siblings were sent to an orphanage where she was sexually abused. She married 4 times. Her first marriage was at 16 to a returning soldier. She had 2 daughters, sent one to live with relatives, and placed the other for adoption. She married Axel Bren Johansson in 1952, Roberto José Puente in 1968, and Pedro Ángel Montalvo, who left her 1 week after their wedding. She kept the surname Puente for over 20 years. Her criminal history was extensive and began long before the murders. In 1948, she was arrested for forgery. In 1960, she was convicted of running a brothel. In 1961, she was committed to DeWitt State Hospital after a binge of drinking, lying, and suicide attempts, diagnosed as a pathological liar with an unstable personality. In 1978, she was convicted of illegally cashing 34 state and federal checks belonging to her tenants. Despite all of this, she managed to present herself as a respectable community member. It's worth pausing on that fact for a moment. Dorothea Puente had a criminal record that included forgery, running a brothel, and cashing her tenants' checks. She had been diagnosed as a pathological liar. She had attempted suicide. And yet, she was able to present herself so convincingly as a caring, charitable woman that social workers continued sending vulnerable people to her door. She ran a boarding house at 1426 F Street in Sacramento. She wore vintage clothing and large glasses. She held Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, helped people sign up for Social Security benefits, funded scholarships, and supported Hispanic community organizations. She took in the people nobody else wanted: recovering alcoholics, drug addicts, the mentally ill, and the elderly. These were people who often had no family checking on them, no one to notice if they disappeared. Puente knew that. She exploited it, and then she killed them. Between 1982 and 1988, Dorothea Puente was charged with 9 murders and convicted of 3. Investigators believed she was responsible for all 9 deaths, but the jury could not reach a verdict on 6 of the counts. She drugged or poisoned her victims until they overdosed, buried their bodies in the yard of the boarding house, and continued cashing their Social Security checks. Flurazepam, a sedative sold under the brand name Dalmane, was found in all 7 exhumed bodies. Her victims included Ruth Monroe, 61, who died of a codeine overdose; Everson Theodore Gilmuth, 77, whose body was found wrapped in plastic in a storage box near the Sacramento River; Betty Mae Palmer, 78, found in a shallow hole in the front yard; Leona Carpenter, 78, James Gallup, 62, found buried under a gazebo; Vera Faye Martin, 61, found under a metal shed; Dorothy Miller, 65, found under a slab of concrete near rose bushes; Benjamin Fink, 55, found wrapped in a plastic bedspread; and Alvaro Bert Gonzalez Montoya, 51, a mentally disabled man whose disappearance finally triggered the investigation. The investigation began when social workers grew concerned about Montoya. They tried to contact him repeatedly. On November 10, 1988, a social worker received a letter purportedly from someone named Michelle Obergone, claiming Montoya had been taken to Utah. The social worker became suspicious and told Puente she was calling the police. On November 11, 1988, a detective returned to the boarding house. Puente gave them permission to dig in the yard and even provided an extra shovel. 30 minutes later, they found the first body. Puente asked if she could go buy coffee. The police said yes. She walked away and fled to Los Angeles. An all-points bulletin was issued on November 13th. On November 16th, she was found at a Los Angeles motel using the alias Donna Johansson. She was arrested and brought back to Sacramento. Her trial began on February 9, 1993. 156 witnesses testified. Over 3,100 exhibits were submitted. The transcript ran over 22,000 pages. After 35 days of deliberation, the jury convicted Puente on 3 counts of first-degree murder, those of Benjamin Fink, Leona Carpenter, and Dorothy Miller. The jury remained deadlocked on the other 6 cases. The jury also deadlocked during the penalty phase, sparing her the death penalty. On December 10, 1993, she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Dorothea Puente, maintained her innocence until her death. She died of natural causes on March 27, 2011, at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla, at the age of 82. Her boarding house at 1426 F Street still stands. It has become a true crime tourist attraction and has been featured on historic home tours. Roger Kiba, the I-5 Strangler. Roger Reese Kiba was born on May 21, 1939 in San Diego County, California. As a child, he would steal women's garments from clotheslines and cut them off using his mother's nursing scissors. This behavior became his forensic signature. As an adult, he lived in Citrus Heights, a suburb of Sacramento. He ran a storage business and had previously made furniture. He was an avid skydiver, which was forensically significant because he used parachute rigging cord to bind and strangle his victims. His wife, Harriet, described him to the press in 1988 as the kindest, sweetest person in the world. His younger brother was a homicide detective in Nevada. Between 1977 and 1987, Roger Kiba murdered at least 7 women. He found almost all of them on freeways around Sacramento, predominantly along the Interstate 5 corridor. His method was consistent. He would kidnap his victims, tie them up with parachute rigging cord, gag them with duct tape, cut open their clothes in irregular shapes with a pair of scissors, rape them, and strangle them. He cut off most of his victims' hair to remove the duct tape before leaving the scene. His first known victim was Lou Ellen Burley, 21, who disappeared on September 10, 1977. She had met Kiba for a job interview. He lured her into his van, saying his office was under construction. He drove her to the Lake Berryessa area, raped and killed her, and dumped her body in a dry riverbed. Her body would not be found for 34 years. His other victims included Laura Rena Heedick, 21, last seen getting into a car with a middle-aged man in Modesto. Barbara Ann Scott, 29, found strangled beneath a tree on a golf course in Antioch. Stephanie Marcia Brown, 19, found in a drainage ditch in San Joaquin County. A pair of unusual scissors was found near her body, a key piece of evidence. Charmaine Marie Sabra, 26, a mother of 3 whose car broke down on the freeway. Catherine Kelly Quinones, 25, and Darcy Renee Frackenpole, 17, a runaway from Seattle whose nude body was left at Echo Summit. Karen Louise Finch, 25, was also believed to be one of his victims, but Kiba was never charged with her death due to insufficient evidence. Kiba's capture began with a failed attack. In 1987, he attempted to handcuff a woman named Deborah Ann Guffey, a prostitute working in the Sacramento area. But Guffey fought back with everything she had. She screamed, she kicked, she resisted with everything in her, and a police officer heard her. That officer's proximity was the break that decades of investigation had been waiting for. With Guffey's testimony, Kiba was convicted of assault and battery and attempted kidnapping and sentenced to just 8 months in the Sacramento County Jail. 8 months for an attempted kidnapping that, had it succeeded, would almost certainly have ended in another murder. But during that jail term, police assembled the murder case against him, using the time to connect forensic evidence from multiple crime scenes. He was arrested for the murder of Darcy Frackenpole, and on March 18, 1991, convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to 25 years to life. But that wasn't the end. In the early 2000s, DNA evidence from the crime scenes was resubmitted and linked Kiba to 6 additional killings. Detective John Bertocchini of the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department spent nearly 2 decades on the case. He even took Kiba on trips outside prison to crime scenes to look for Burley's body, buying him fast food to build rapport. In 2011, a detective found a bone fragment in a dry creek. DNA testing confirmed it belonged to Lou Ellen Burley, 34 years after she disappeared. On November 5, 2009, Kiba pleaded guilty to 6 additional murders to avoid the death penalty. He was sentenced to 6 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. The sentencing took place in San Joaquin Superior Court, Bertocchini also persuaded California lawmakers to pass a law allowing Kibbe, who had murdered victims in different counties, to stand trial in just one county, sparing victims' families from multiple trials. On February 28, 2021, Roger Kibbe was found dead in his cell at Mule Creek State Prison in Ione, California. He had been strangled to death by his cellmate, Jason Budrow, age 40. Budrow was a self-avowed Satanist serving a life sentence for another murder. He claimed he killed Kibbe to avenge his victims. An autopsy confirmed Kibbe died from manual strangulation. The Amador County Sheriff's Office noted the grim irony: the I-5 strangler had himself been strangled. Detective Bertocchini believed Kibbe likely had many more victims, noting the decade-long gap between his first known murder in 1977 and his 1986 to 1987 killing spree. Remembering their lives. If you've made it this far, thank you for staying with me. These are not easy stories to hear, and they weren't easy to tell. But I think there's value in looking closely at darkness, not because we're drawn to it, but because understanding it helps us recognize the warning signs. It helps us demand better from the systems that are supposed to protect people. And it helps us remember the victims. Let's talk about the victims for a moment. Mary Ann Pesci and Anita Lucchesa were college students trying to visit friends. Aiko Ku was a 15-year-old dance student who missed her bus. Cindy Shaw was a Cabrillo College student. Rosalind Thorpe and Alice Liu were UC Santa Cruz students. Sally Hallett was a woman visiting her best friend. 4-year-old Demon Francis and 9-year-old David Hughes were children in their own home. Father Henri Tomei was a priest in a confessional. Fred Perez was a 72-year-old man gardening. David Oliker, Robert Spector, Brian Scott Card, and Mark Dreibelbiss were teenage boys camping. Ambrose Griffin was a father carrying groceries. Teresa Wallen was 3 months pregnant. Daniel Meredith was a friend. Evelyn Maroth was a mother. Jason Maroth was 6. David Ferreira was 22 months old. Wayne Duquette was a bartender. Terry Lee Gambrell was a Marine. Raymond Davis was 14, looking for his dog. Jeffrey Sayre was 15. Merle Chance was 8. Etta Kane was hiking. Mary Frances Bennett was jogging. Ellen Hansen said no when a man told her he wanted to rape her and he shot her. Stephen Herdel survived being shot in the neck. Heather Skaggs was 20 years old. Donald Lake was mentally disabled. The Dubs family included a 1-year-old infant. Kathleen Allen was 18. Deborah Jackson was 29. Henrietta Wright was 35. Princess Berthomieu was 15. Janisha Peters was 25. Enietra Washington survived being shot and left for dead. Carol Sund was a mother. Yuli Sund was 15. Silvina Palazzo was a 16-year-old exchange student from Argentina. Joey Armstrong was a naturalist who loved Yosemite. Ruth Monroe was 61. Everson Gilmouth was 77. Leona Carpenter was 78. Benjamin Fink was 55. Alvaro Montoya was 51 and mentally disabled. Lou Ellen Burley was 21, going to a job interview. Stephanie Brown was 19. Charmaine Sabra was a mother of 3 whose car broke down. Darcy Frackenpole was 17. These were people, real people with families and futures. Some of them were children, some were elderly, some were struggling with addiction or poverty or mental illness. Some were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. None of them deserved what happened to them. And there are things we can learn from how these cases were handled. Richard Chase was released from psychiatric care and taken off medication by his mother. Herbert Mullen was repeatedly discharged from mental hospitals because doctors believed he posed no risk. Lonnie David Franklin Jr. SDNA was supposed to be entered into a database after a 2003 conviction, but wasn't collected because of a bureaucratic gap. Patrick Kearney was able to kill for 15 years before anyone connected the dots. The LAPD's original investigation into the Southside Slayer murders was criticized for not taking the deaths of poor, black women seriously enough. Dorothea Puente was a convicted criminal who was still able to take in vulnerable people as a boarding house operator. These are systemic failures, They don't excuse what the killers did, but they explain how they were able to do it for so long. And they point to things we can do better. Better mental health treatment, better information sharing between jurisdictions, better attention to all victims, regardless of their background or circumstances, better oversight of people who are entrusted with the care of vulnerable individuals. There are also stories of remarkable perseverance in these cases. The neighbor who wrote down Herbert Mullen's license plate, the undercover officer who collected Lonnie Franklin Jr.'s discarded pizza, Nancy Holden, who recognized Richard Chase and called police, Detective John Bertocchini, who spent nearly 2 decades working the Kibbe case and even took the killer on trips to find victims' remains, Margaret Prescott and the Black Coalition, who held weekly protests demanding attention for the Southside Slayer victims, the Calaveras County Sheriff's Office still using modern DNA to identify remains from the Lake and Eng case as recently as 2025. These are the people who brought justice. They didn't give up, even when the cases seemed impossible. They remembered the victims, even when the world seemed to forget. California is a beautiful place. It really is. The redwoods, the coastline, the mountains, the deserts. It's a place people go to start new lives. It's a place of dreams. But it's also a place where, over the span of several decades, at least 11 people who were born there grew up to become serial killers. The sunshine doesn't reach everywhere. And sometimes the darkest things grow in the brightest places. If there's one thing I hope you take away from this, it's not the names of the killers. It's the names of the people they took. Because those are the names that matter. Those are the names that should be remembered. Night reflection. Night has settled across the Golden State. The Pacific Ocean continues its steady rhythm against the shore. Moonlight reflects across quiet waters, while distant lighthouses keep their silent watch. In the mountains, cool air drifts through forests that have witnessed centuries of change. Across deserts, valleys, and cities alike, another evening unfolds much as countless evenings have before. Some people are finishing late shifts. Others are reading to their children before bed. Friends share conversations over dinner. Travelers continue home beneath the stars. Life moves forward. Perhaps that is one of history's quietest lessons. Even after unimaginable hardship, communities continue to care for one another. Families continue to celebrate birthdays, graduations, weddings, and ordinary moments that become life's greatest treasures. Hope is renewed, not through grand gestures alone, but through countless acts of kindness repeated every day. As we leave California tonight, may we carry with us not only the lessons of difficult history, but also a renewed appreciation for compassion, resilience, and the people who dedicate their lives to seeking truth and supporting others. The landscapes remain, the communities endure, and every place, no matter how familiar, holds stories that remind us of both the fragility and the strength of the human spirit. Thank you for spending part of your evening with me. I hope tonight's story gave you a deeper appreciation for the people who sought the truth, and compassion for the families whose lives were forever changed. If you enjoyed tonight's episode, I'd be honored to have you join me again. Next time, we'll journey to another state and discover another story. Every night has a story,